Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the podcast Escaping Rock Bottom. A great guest on with us today, Will Christ. He is a clinical intern over at one of our partners, Calvary Healing Center, right here in Central Phoenix. Will, it's good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so we met a few weeks ago when Calvary Healing Center is one of our partners here, so they shuttle their residents over twice a month, and we do music and art healing at our studio at Art of Our Soul. You came with one of the classes, and so that's when we first met. Before we get into like what you're doing now as a clinical intern and helping people in recovery get sober and kind of get their lives back on track, I want people to get to know who you are. So I always tell people, Will, take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised Phoenix, Arizona at Banner Thunderbird back in 1990 and lived here for a little bit. My mom and dad divorced when I was about two and a half years old, and didn't really see him for quite some time. I don't remember how long. All I remember after that was supervised visitation and seeing my dad there, and then eventually having some sort of a relationship, but I can get into that in a second. So born and raised here, lived with my mom and my biological sister in an apartment for a little bit. She met my stepdad. And we moved to California after they got married for a bit, and then lived up in Beaver Creek up north in Arizona, went to kindergarten there, and then came back to the South. And I lived in Casa Grande, Arizona from about first grade to high school, and then I went back up to Phoenix. Childhood, for the most part, was good. We went on a lot of vacations, a lot of trips. Had an okay relationship with my biological father. He is just very stuck in his ways. He could be very emotionally abusive, down-putting, and I think that's where a lot of my self-deprecation and really negative self-talk came from in my life. I was told that he was an addict. He was an alcoholic. Don't really know anything beyond that, beyond his life. I was curious and saw some court documents about an arrest and stuff back in the late 80s. Don't know what that's about. Didn't want to ask him. Doubt he would have ever answer about that either. But even up until now, I mean, he's just been very cold, very, very shallow human being. And I still try to keep in touch. I am very grateful that after I retired out of the Army last year, he let me stay at his home, but that was still difficult. But so getting raised up in the church, Christian church, and like I said, lots of vacations. Didn't know it back then, but looking back now and in my recovery, my parents did struggle with alcohol, and I remember many times, them getting drunk and. When my cousin Holly committed suicide, I remember we went to skydive Eloy. I was about 11, 12 years old, and my mom got obliterated. And I didn't understand what was going on, the brevity of that. I knew that, we had a family death. She was very upset, but at that time I didn't understand. I looked at alcohol from like a lens of fear. Like I didn't want it to control my life. I saw what it did to other people. And I just didn't want any part of it initially. And so growing up in school, played sports, played baseball, got into doing percussion for school, concerts, stuff like that for the school. And then kind of fell from that and went more towards, playing alone with my kit, my drum kit. I got one when I was about 12 years old. And then probably 13, 14 years old, started getting into playing with, others. We played metal, and my first band was My Sweet Demise. And we played some shows like just around Arizona. We played the Battle of the Bands back in high school. And it was just me and my buddy Cody Johnson. He played guitar, and that was us for a bit. And then we started getting more members, and then we had a full set. And that was fun. We did that for quite some time, played at Zia Records, played at like Art in the Alley type stuff, just easy events that we could pick up, especially being in school. And kind of fell out from that. We had some issues with the band, and then I ended up starting another band with another couple of group members from another band that we were, would play with, and we called it the Reading Crucible, and it was very like dark black metal, death metal type stuff. Because that's just what I really got into back in.
Let me go back because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
I know you is clearly like a rocker.
Yeah,
and we're getting into the band stuff, but I want to focus on some of that childhood trauma.
Yeah,
because a lot of people who are listening are people who are in recovery themselves.
Yep.
They're looking for hope. They're looking for answers, and they're looking for some similarities as to, wow, I kind of connect with some of that trauma too.
Yeah.
So I want to really talk about some of that childhood trauma, because from my experience and my studies and my belief system is that addiction is born out of childhood trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
Unhealed trauma keeps us using. And so, you had the divorce at age 2. That is a childhood trauma, right? Dad is not present in your life.
Yep.
That is childhood trauma, right? Then you have, both parents struggling at some point in their lives with alcohol, right? That is trauma for a child to see that, parents acting differently and the demeaning father and, as a son, not having that father presence is traumatic. It just is, right? Because we're going to have to fill that void with something else, right? We're going to overcompensate and start filling those voids. So with all that compacted trauma in the early stages of your life, when did you and your life start going off the rails?
I was about 14. And like going even further back, we don't realize like how deep our trauma can go. And even Gabor Mate talked about trauma and childhood trauma, and how when he was little, even just a baby, and his mom was stressed out, and it would stress him out. And this was all during World War II when the Nazis invaded. And so all of this stuff, like all of the, the abuse my mom would talk about from my father, and the narcissism and the manipulation, like he would lock her out, he would leave stuff out and then yell at her on purpose, blaming her for that kind of stuff. I don't remember any of that, but I'm sure it impacted me because of how she was feeling.
Right. Well, and here's the other thing too, is that generational trauma is real. And so, and besides, when we're children, we feel that energy. Mm-hmm. We absolutely do. Like, as a matter of fact, we may not be able to physically remember what happened to us between the ages of 0 and 3. But that's actually very formative in how our brains are wired.
Exactly.
And so when that trauma hits us, like I don't remember what happened to me when I was 2 years old. We can't cognitively remember that. However, the trauma we experienced during that time period has now messed up the wiring within our brain. And we don't even realize that the trauma we experienced from 0 to 3 is the reason why we continue to misfire as an adult. We sit there and we tell people all the time, like, listen, man, you're making a lot of poor life choices, right? We're like, why do I keep choosing these people? Or why am I making these poor life decisions? Well, oftentimes it could be between the traumas that we experience between the ages of 0 and 3. Well, if we can't cognitively remember that as an adult, we can't pinpoint it, right? And so they're like, I don't understand why I'm using. I don't know why I'm this. I don't know why I'm that, right? Which, it goes back to doing reprocessing work and really going back and reaching the amygdala where we store those traumatic memories. That's getting past the frontal lobe. But you started experimenting with that. Like, what was yours like? Was it alcohol? Was it drugs? Like, how did you start allowing that energy to come out?
It was alcohol. You got like the school influences, middle school and high school. They, people talked about smoking bud and drinking alcohol and stuff like that. And I don't remember how in the hell we got alcohol at 14, 15 years old.
You don't? You didn't steal from your parents? That's what I did. I stole wine coolers in junior high school. I used to get kids drunk on wine coolers. Like, I literally went to my parents' refrigerator and just grabbed wine coolers, put them in my sack lunch, and like got people drunk.
There was definitely times where I would sneak in. Like, eventually I'd sneak into their liquor cabinet and get alcohol. But the first time I got drunk was 14 years old, and it was Mickey's 40 ounces.
Oh my God, we used to drink the
and
40s.
They talked about doing the double fisting.
Yeah.
And I drank one of them, had a couple of shots of tequila, and smoked some weed, and that was my first time. And anything after that, I don't remember the night. I don't remember where I was. I was at one of my friends' houses, and just kind of spilled into there because at at that point, that fear of like blacking out or not having control of my body went away when I experienced being drunk and feeling that, that warm, fuzzy feeling you initially get when you're drinking alcohol. And so it spilled over into, weekend parties in high school. We had one party get busted by the cops, and I got a minor in consumption when I was 17 years old. Almost got a minor in consumption when I was 19, just about to leave for the Army. And somehow I talked my way out of that one. I still to this day can't believe that happened.
What led you to the Army?
I've always had an interest in like first responder, police, EMT, firefighter, that kind of thing. And I didn't really know where to go after high school. I used to swear up and down to my mom that I'd never go to college. I would just do a trade or, some kind of certification. And so I went and got my EMT license right after high school up at Glendale Community College, and started doing that for a while. Did some ride-alongs with Gila River, did a small stint with Glendale, and it was in 2009 during the recession. So it was tough, and no jobs full-time were available. I was too young at the time. I was 18, 19 years old, and you got to be 21 at some departments. And so I was lost. I didn't know what to do. And so from there, I looked into the military. I thought I was looking at the Navy at first because you can become a corpsman, and that's in the medical field. I picked the Army. It's kind of in my family blood. I have grandparents that served in World War II, Korea, and so I stuck with that, and I was excited. It was a huge change because everything was going down even then, and not realizing it, how far down things were going in my life, letting alcohol even then control it. And before I even went to rehab, I used to blame going to Afghanistan as a combat medic and seeing the stuff I saw there. But even back when I was 14, 15 years old, I was still making terrible decisions.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to get drunk and, watch TV. I got drunk and I did really dumb things.
Yeah.
Really dumb things.
So you end up coming back from the U.S. Army, right?
Yeah.
And at what point do you, what did that rock bottom look like? At what point did you hit that rock bottom and you're like, oh boy, Will definitely needs to turn his life around. Like, this is the end, and you decided to get sober?
So I served in the Army for a total of 11 years and about 8 months, almost 12 years. First 9 years I was a combat medic, and then I did a program called Green and Gold. And so I went from enlisted to commission. I was able to go to Grand Canyon University here in Phoenix and finish up my bachelor's degree. And the entire time, pretty much through my Army career, I was a functioning alcoholic, even before going downrange. Obviously, coping with that trauma with alcohol made things worse, made my PTSD worse. There were many times where I made that decision to just get completely blacked out drunk, even after I had my son and my daughter. There would be periods of sobriety to kind of get my act together and prepare for a leadership school or some kind of fitness competition that was going on. But then I would go right back to it. And it wouldn't just be like, I'll have 5. It was, I'll have a 5th after a couple of months hiatus from drinking. And so that caused a lot of issues in that marriage that I was having at the time. We had 2 kids at that point. It was back in 2019, and the fights were horrendous. Things were out of control, and I was preparing to go to a leadership school for ROTC. It's a requirement to commission, and even up to that point, I was drinking. I went to the school hungover, and I kept thinking, I need to change something. Something's got to stop. Didn't stop there. I got home and found out that some things had happened. And now looking at it, I understand things were strained. People make mistakes. And I'm definitely not perfect too. Because after I found out about stuff happening when I was gone, I'm not going to specifically name it. We have a good relationship right now. And I'm very blessed. and happy to have that. But that happened. Got her out of the house. The kids moved in with her parents and her, and I spiraled for a bit. I had a pretty small point where I didn't want to live anymore because of that, and seeing my marriage fall apart and getting to that point. And I woke up one day and I had like the bell ringers, the mini shooters, and I took a shot, and then I said, I need to stop. And so I pulled up, AA groups near me, and I found what Celebrate Recovery was. And so that night I went to a Celebrate Recovery meeting. It was about September 2019, and ended up going there for a while, got my 30-day chip, got my 60-day chip, and we were seeing a counselor. At that point, she didn't know that I had a revenge fling, just out of all the anger and animosity that was going on. And I was trying to hide it, but it was eating at me. And so I eventually told her, and things kind of blew up again. Yeah. We stopped going to counseling. We had gone to a marriage retreat. That all went out the window. And the tables kind of turned on me, between all the drinking over the years and then that happening. And so I started drinking again and picked that up for a bit. Met my second ex-wife in college during all of this happening. And so we started dating. I filed for divorce, and then things progressed rather quickly with Andrea and I, my second ex-wife. And I thought I had found sobriety. I found my niche. I was doing good. I was working on the things I needed to work on. I wasn't going to groups. I didn't have a sponsor. I had nothing. I had thought that if I just used my willpower, and life is going in a better direction now that the marriage is over and I found somebody that's better for me, that wasn't the case. And so I stayed away from alcohol for about 6 months and went back to the Army. I went to Basic Officer Leader course. It's a leadership course after you commission in the Army. And I was avoiding the parties because I'll have
How
to
old
say
were you
it.
at this point? Like, how long ago was this?
This was in 2020.
All right. So when did you finally get sober?
2021.
2021.
September. Today is 19 months.
Okay.
Since I went to the hospital, I went to the ER and decided to get sober. I went to a 30-day residential treatment up in Oregon because I was stationed up in Washington at the time.
All right. And then in that time period, so that was a lot.
There's a lot.
All right. So obviously you have relationship issues you still clearly need to work on. That comes from childhood. Right? And that comes from childhood, right? Seeing your parents and seeing all the chaos that you saw as a child clearly was passed down to you. So you're continuing to make poor life choices when you're finding your women. These women are filling a void and
filling that validation, that need for validation.
And
that
obviously it falls apart quickly, right? And it will continue, right? That pattern will continue until you go back and actually heal your inner child from that childhood experience. So that's what I would impress upon you the most, is doing all of those therapies that continue to allow you to do that reprocessing work. But you, like so many other people who are now in the treatment world, and when you're sober, a majority of the people who work in treatment and behavioral health are in recovery themselves. And so you're now over at Calvary Healing Center, right? So you're over at Calvary Healing Center. Where are you going to school now?
Arizona State University.
Okay, so you're at ASU, getting what degree?
My master's of social work.
Okay, so you want to be
a mental health counselor, mental health therapist, addiction, trauma, veterans.
What's it like now? What's it like being on the other side of it, right? Because you're an intern over at Calvary, and you're seeing people who are coming in, shaking. They're in detox. Their lives in shambles. Like, they're at their rock bottom. What is that like for you? And how are you able to take your past experiences to be able to connect?
Even to this day, I still deal with some imposter syndrome. At first, I was kind of in disbelief how quickly things progressed from going to rehab and then, being told I was going to get medically retired from the Army. And then 3 months later, starting to go through my second divorce, and I almost relapsed then. I almost fell apart. I was hurt big time. I didn't see it coming. Looking back, there are things that I could have got, flicked myself and went, look what's going on. Be prepared, be ready. And so I took all the skills that I learned from over the years of resiliency training in the Army, and the things I did there, and the things I learned in rehab, and seeing my own therapist do all the filing and the paperwork, and doing case managing stuff and the sessions. And then a couple weeks after I started at Calvary, I was filing progress notes and group therapy notes, and I was like, holy shit, I'm here. And that feeling is amazing. Being able to say that just a year ago at that time, I was lost. August 2021, I had no idea that I was going to hit so low that I didn't want to live anymore, and start acting on things, and just being saved in that moment, going to the ER, my buddy picking me up, and going to rehab, and then just pulling through all that, and being able to use the experience that I have dealt with in marriage, early childhood trauma in the military, from deployment to war, and just everything else in between. Because the things we do while we're intoxicated, even if you don't remember it, it's still traumatizing to go through that kind of stuff, to get into fights, to commit stupid crimes, to break things, to get in these massive arguments. It's tough. It's a tough disease to deal with, but being on the other side and being equipped and ready to fight this war, because this is the real war on drugs. It's not the criminal piece and legislation piece. It's, we have to rehabilitate. We have to save people. We have to show them where all of this pain comes from.
What do you do currently in your life, being 19 months?
Yeah.
19 months clean. What are you doing now? Because I'm going to tell you something. It's so speaking truth. I was clean and sober for 11 years. I had 11 years of continuous recovery. I hit 5 meetings a week. I never healed from my trauma. All I did was go to meetings. And then, trauma hit me in 2020, and I experienced that relapse. And that was after that experience that I began doing inner child healing work. So not only similar to EMDR, deep breath work, getting past the frontal lobe to the amygdala, right? Bringing forward the amygdala to the frontal lobe in order to reprocess all that childhood trauma. And I am now 2.5 years. Every Tuesday, I spend 2 hours with my shaman/therapist doing inner child healing work. 2.5 years in with him. And I'm still not done.
No.
And as a matter of fact, it's a lifelong commitment for me to be working with him every Tuesday. I'm privileged enough, and I admit that I can afford to do that kind of therapy work, because that to me is truly what heals. Meetings will not heal you. Going to AA meetings,
multiple things,
will not heal you. And I don't care if people in AA come back at me. I'll tell them, science will prove going to meetings will not heal your trauma. It will not rewire your brain. It will give you tools to manage triggers. But I look at life saying, why do I want to manage triggers? Why don't I want to just go back and heal so that I am not triggered? So I look at recovery in two totally different perspectives. Like, great to have tools, right?
Yeah, of course.
But let's not get triggered, so we don't even have to lean into that toolbox all the time to manage that fucking white knuckling.
Walking on the side of a cliff continuously for the rest of your life.
Exactly. So what are you doing now to remain healed? Because it sounds like to me like you were an angry drunk.
Yeah.
Am I getting that vibe? Yeah. Okay.
Well, if you're very highly emotional, angry.
Okay. So angry, drunk. That emotion is living within inside of you, and that alcohol is just giving it a platform to come out, right? And so I just began doing some anger work with my shaman, because I've tapped into, I was never an angry drunk or an angry drug addict, never. As a matter of fact, I was the polar opposite. I became like a lover. But I am doing now anger stuff because I can feel that in me, and he could sense it in me. And so now I'm doing anger stuff with him, and I'm in session. I do deep breath work, and I'm yelling and I'm screaming. I'm letting that energy out. So
Cut
when you
through the layers.
yeah. So when you're doing the alcohol, it's just like, okay, now we're going to open the lid, let it all out.
Yep.
That's all in there. So what are you doing now to kind of heal yourself so that you can be of service to others, but also, my God, be of service to yourself?
Lots of self-care. I mean, still going to groups and stuff. That's important. It's not the be-all, end-all to go to an AA meeting.
No, it's a piece
or
of
go
the
to
pie.
CR. It's piece of the pie. Yeah. You have to have a multitude of different tools in your toolbox.
Correct.
And there's multiple layers that you have to chop at. And so coming out of rehab, I had a addiction counselor. She was a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so we did individual and IOP. Before that, I was doing the PHP program with ADAPT. And then I also had my counselor. And at that time, we were going over mostly military trauma, stuff like that, and doing not cognitive behavioral therapy, CPT. It's drawn a blank on me right now. Yeah. But having that, that blessing of massive continuum of care and being able to see multiple different counselors and go to different therapies was huge. And then, of course, retiring out of the Army, it's like I have the VA and groups, and I really had to add more to my life.
Right.
And so lots of hobbies, woodworking, messing with my truck, building her up to start going up north and really doing some off-roading, rock crawling. Drums is definitely the biggest one. I think that's a huge outlet for a lot of anger, that layer of anger that I still get sometimes, just from a lot of things that have happened. And I'm seeing my therapist through the VA, and he's been amazing. And we're chopping at a lot of different things over time, but we're not just all over the place. We're trying to say, okay, where are we at now? Where do we want to go? What's the plan? And I plan on doing therapy for probably the rest of my life, especially with the chance of vicarious trauma, and listening to, these patient stories. And, it's also called compassion fatigue. And so when you're helping others and you're taking care of others a lot, it weans you out.
It depletes you down. We see 60 people a day.
Yeah.
60 people a day at Art of Our Soul. Trust me, I know. And that's why I work with my shaman every Tuesday. We do energy and aura clearings and really making sure that we learn to be compassionate, but with boundaries. We can't be the solution for every single person that comes knocking at our door. You can still be very compassionate, but it's draining.
But even with that, seeing a therapist, going to groups, stuff like that, I mean, even going to my internship is healing to me. Yeah. Because now I'm fighting back against what was destroying me. And even if I save one person, it's perfectly fine with me. I understand that life is tough right now. Yeah. And it's honestly only going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. And so being able to do that and share my story and share my piece on that in a clinically relevant sense. Yeah. You don't want to overshare.
Finding purpose in that.
Yeah.
Finding purpose in that.
Exactly.
All right. So listen, here's what I suggest we do. I suggest that we get back together in 2 years.
Let's do it.
In 2 years, just to get a recap. You're 19 months in. This is very beginning of very beginning of that journey, and you're getting your you're going to be a licensed social worker. Right?
So the first step after graduation is get my associate license. And then so it within
but eventually become
2
a
years
counselor.
Beyond. Yeah. So you become a counselor when you don't have your license, but you have your MSW.
Right.
And then so as soon as you get your associate license from the Arizona Board of Behavioral Health, you are a licensed therapist. You're just at the associate level. There are things that you can't do that a licensed independent clinical social worker can do. And so I'll start working at my hours on that immediately, just because I feel like I want to keep pushing myself in this field and go as far as I can, and just keep helping people. I feel blessed, just because of things that have come to me from my military service. And eventually I would love to retire from everything and just do free work, like just help people get out in the community, volunteer my time. Yeah. Because we need it. We're, as a country, as a society, we were struggling with this addiction. This disease is everywhere, and you see it every day in Phoenix.
Yeah, it's
every
everywhere.
day.
It's everywhere, dude.
Yeah.
Congrats
Thank
over at Calvary, and good luck with finishing school.
Thank you.
Yeah, and continue that journey, and just continue to be there for others, and continue to help others. You'll find your purpose in that.
Yeah.
That's how I found my purpose, in doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So there's nothing more rewarding than that.
Oh,
there is
big time.
nothing more than rewarding. Will Christ over at the clinical intern, one of the clinical interns over at Calvary Healing Center. Thank you, my man. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. And we'll see you back here for the next episode of Escaping Rock Bottom.